We all are facing the triple planetary crisis, which is climate change, pollution, and unprecedented biodiversity loss. Climate action is like a marathon, but the marathon can only be completed when everyone has finished. So no one should be leaving behind. My job is to make sure that President's vision and his initiatives related to environment and climate are well implemented. Almost half of our water resources come from neighboring countries. Kazakhstan is very aware of the importance of just transition.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Astana Times YouTube channel. I'm very delighted to welcome tonight as my guest Zulfiya Suleimenova, advisor to the President of Kazakhstan and Special Representative on International Environmental Cooperation. Zulfiya, thank you very much for joining us tonight in the studio.
Thank you very much for having me.
I want to start with some personal question, but not so personal, but as a Special Representative, a role which is relatively new, established only a few years ago, what does your role entail on a daily basis? And also, if you could share with us what's the most challenging part of your work?
Well, thank you very much. Not many people know, but one of the very first decisions that President Tokayev has made when he was elected as a president back in 2019 was to re-establish Ministry of Ecology. As you may know, for some years, for a number of years, we didn't really have a separate agency on environment and was integrated within the Ministry of Energy. So one of his first decisions was to re-establish Ministry of Ecology and basically strengthen our environmental policy. So starting from that time on, environment and climate policy became one of the very important priority areas in President Tokayev's political agenda. And following from that, that is the reason why this position was established. And basically my job is to make sure that President's vision and his initiatives related to environment and climate are well implemented, that his vision is implemented the way he envisions it. And of course, when we talk about environment, one of the very important aspects that we think about is to make sure that the future generations have and can enjoy the natural resources and the environment the way it is, well, hopefully. And our job is basically to protect all these natural resources, and my job is to implement this vision of the president to ensure that our future generations can enjoy the planet, the habitable planet and its resources.
In your role, what's been the most challenging part so far for you personally, but also professionally?
Well, I can't really, there is a saying, if you are enjoying what you are doing, you are not doing your job, you are doing what you're enjoying. So to me, working in environment and in climate is something that I profoundly enjoy personally, and I can say that this is a really great pleasure and honor for me to be to be advisor of the president and his special representative working on this matter. Of course, given a very active policy and visionary policy of our president, there are many initiatives that he proposes, and therefore, of course, that translates into a very proactive environmental foreign policy of our country. And sometimes, of course, juggling is not always easy, but always exciting. And it is also very humbling to represent our republic and make sure that our republic is better known, and our positions are well understood at the international level. So these are some of the things which I do, but also other things is I really enjoy not only working at the international level, but really going to the level of to the grassroots level. For example, just at the beginning of this month, I joined the Hydrobiology and Ecology Institute in scientific expedition to research the Caspian seals. Wow. And by really learning what is happening on the ground and really translating it into concrete policies and really making sure that we marry what is happening on the ground and what is the vision of the president, and make sure that there is a very good and effective measures being undertaken is always really exciting. Not always easy, but always very exciting. So I really have a great pleasure of doing this on a day-to-day basis.
I think it's a very important topic that you're raising about the Caspian Sea and the ecosystem of the sea, because we just recently we did an interview with one of the key researchers on the Caspian Sea, Cecilia Boymukanova, and it could give an understanding of a large-scale problem that we are yet to face. And since we mentioned water, I want to focus particularly on water scarcity and addressing the United Nations headquarters just a few years ago. You said that water is a blue gold. Why is that, and how looming is the crisis that we are facing?
I think when you're sitting in your office, in general, sitting in the offices, it's very difficult to imagine how is the situation for farmers, how is the situation in some remote areas in Kazakhstan. Back in 2021, I had the pleasure of traveling around the Northern Aral Sea, and I visited a number of the villages of fishermen. And I was a guest in one of the fishermen's house. And I was speaking to his family and to him, and I was asking many questions. For example, I asked about how did the return of the Northern Aral Sea, the efforts of the government of Kazakhstan to preserve that part, really impacted their lifestyle. And he gave me a very interesting but very simple example. He said, back 10 years back, there were only 8 families remaining in this village. Now there are 40 families. So people are coming back because they do see themselves very connected to the sea and their lifestyles very connected to the sea. Right. And then I asked them, what is your dream? We all have different dreams. We all want to be, to aspire careers, something else. But they told me a very interesting thing. They said, we don't really have many dreams. Our only dream is rain and snow. Which is basically the idea that how important water and precipitations that form all these water resources are important for them. They are not really dreaming about other things. They are dreaming about very basic things, about how the precipitation will go. Will I have water? Will I have my livelihood? Would I be able to feed my family, and so on? So, of course, seeing that from this perspective, you can really understand the scale of the problem, and that is the reason this is so. The leadership in the country would be very critical to really push these issues forward. And I would like to really emphasize that our president, he speaks very often about the importance. I will not even say very often. I would say always. Always, right. In every major speech, he always speaks about the water resources. He speaks about the importance of integrating the water saving technologies. He talks about water saving. He talks also about the environmental and ecological culture, that everything that we are seeing, living in balance with the environment, with nature, is not about something else. It is about our culture, and it is about our own relationship, and really creating this sustainable balance really depends on us. So these are some of the very important pillars of how presidents see it, and having this very strong leadership is extremely important. And really this leadership, it is really translating into very concrete actions. To give you an example, in 2023, the Ministry of Ecology was split into 2, and we have a separate Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation established. Why this has been done? It was done because the water resources management became one of the very important policy priorities of the president and of the government, and therefore to better and more effectively translate this vision into actions and really address the existing challenges really required having a separate agency that fully focuses on these aspects. And I think these are some of the examples of this big vision.
As a journalist, I'm very well aware of the efforts on the national level that the government and the separate ministry is doing to tackle this problem. But if we speak about broader regional cooperation, what are some of the mechanisms that have been established to address this shared problem together?
Well, this is a very good question because in Kazakhstan, we speak a lot about the importance of transboundary water cooperation. One reason being that almost half of our water resources come from neighboring countries, so we can't really afford ourselves not to speak about transboundary cooperation. And some of the regions, like the Sirdarya Basin regions, that is the southern part of Kazakhstan, the Shutalas Basin, they depend from 80 to 90% of water resources basically come from other neighboring states. Thankfully, we have very well established regional mechanisms by which we interact and deal with. We work together with our neighbors. To give you an example, on the Sirdarya Basin, we basically back in 1992 we signed an Almaty agreement in Almaty, 5 Central Asian countries, which is basically aimed at managing water resources jointly based on the previously established principles. We're still upholding all these mechanisms and agreements. We also have a regional international fund for saving the RLC. It just happens so that starting from last year's January, Kazakhstan is chairing in this unique regional organization. One of the very important aspects is that at the moment, this organization is undergoing a reform process. Of course, this is up to the countries and to the negotiators to decide how this international institution, the regional institution, is going to look like and operate. But I would like to say that it is a very unique organization. Of course, the reform itself doesn't come from the recognition of it. I mean, it doesn't come from any allegations about its inefficiency, but rather it comes from the fact that it's been almost 30 years that we established this institution. The time pass, and everything is changing. The world is changing, the climate is changing, and of course that requires some additional adaptive coping mechanisms to be established, and the institutions need to evolve. And that is the reason why we are now discussing the reform process. So that being said, Kazakhstan, as a chairman in the IFAS, an International Fund for Saving the RLC, we're now putting our utmost efforts into making sure that we let's say, hold our mission with efficiency, and we would be able to present very concrete and good results by the end of our chairmanship.
That's a lot of work that you were just has described. And it brings me to my next question. And I think it would be impossible to have our conversation without talking about climate, right? And when people speak about climate change and climate agenda, people like to bring up numbers and figures. And as equally as important they are, it is also important to mention the local communities, like you mentioned just earlier in the conversation. What does it take for Kazakhstan, and maybe from your experience working in the international multilateral format, to really create or foster a people-centered climate agenda, not the one that focuses on just hitting the numbers right, but also making difference for communities?
When we speak about the communities and climate, that actually constitutes a very important debates that are happening around just transition. Because while we are trying to reach our numbers in terms of mitigation, that is reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions, which is critical, while we're having these discussions around the importance of adaptation and doubling the financing in adaptation. What is also very important is that we don't really leave anyone behind. So no one should be leaving behind, and we really have to make sure that the policies that we are implementing or the decisions that we are making, they are not alienating the population and the communities. Because at the end of the day, it is about people, and it is about their livelihood. It is about their everyday life and their families, and we can't really be doing something differently. This is especially important for Kazakhstan because, as our president always says, Kazakhstan is a social state, and therefore it is very important for us to make sure that the well-being of the population is well respected and well taken care of. So, having said that, of course, our climate policies, they basically stem from this understanding. So there are several things. First of all, unfortunately, climate, unlike some other environmental issues like pollution, they are not really subject to one territory or to certain boundaries. So therefore, the cooperation would be absolutely critically important, and really being part of the international forums where we discuss very concrete solutions becomes very important. Secondly, climate action is like a marathon, but the marathon can only be completed when everyone has finished. So if someone is lagging behind, unfortunately, we all are lagging behind. And that being said, of course, Kazakhstan, and I will come back to the policies of Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is doing its own fair share, but everyone else, every single country has to do their fair share, because the greenhouse gas emissions, they just concentrate in the atmosphere, and they don't really, they create certain effect at the global level. So therefore, of course, really working with other countries becomes very important. And thirdly, of course, we understand that dealing with climate-related aspects, be it mitigation or adaptation, it is impossible without cooperation on a more practical level in terms of the technology transfer, financing opportunities, and so on, because there is only as much as countries can do. But there needs to be, if we're expecting more actions, and more actions are needed, unfortunately, because the current projections are not very optimistic. There needs to be very concrete channels and mechanisms which support the ambitions and the actions of the countries who are willing to do more. Coming back to Kazakhstan, we have set a very concrete goal of reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions by 15% by 2030 and 25% contingent to the international support and technology transfer. There are different discussions in terms of the level of ambitions, but it is very important to understand the context. Kazakhstan is a developing country, and we're already setting an absolute greenhouse gas emission reduction goal. This is very ambitious based on the projections and based on the calculations. And of course, this kind of course will help us to set our further path towards decarbonization. We also have our strategic goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2060, which was also announced by our president back in 2021. Now we already have our strategy on reaching carbon neutrality, and we're basically at the latest stage of developing the roadmap on how we want to achieve the carbon neutrality. This year, we are working on our nationally determined contributions, which is going to be our new ambitions and goals, which will be going towards 2035. And hopefully we will be able to develop it as an investment plan so that there is a very clear understanding from the investors and from different actors where we want to go, how we want to go, and how we want to decarbonize the economy. But but at the same time, of course, we also understand that really dealing with climate, especially mitigation actions, also require the regional approach, because regionally it is more manageable and more efficient to deliver very concrete results. And that is the reason why President has announced the initiative on holding in 2026 the Regional Ecological Summit in partnership with the United Nations and other international organizations, because the idea is that unfortunately the world is facing, and Kazakhstan is not an exclusion, we all are facing the triple planetary crisis, which is climate change, pollution, and unprecedented biodiversity loss, and we need to develop very concrete actions and very concrete roadmaps in terms of how we want to deal with that and what should be the next actions of each of the country and jointly as a region going forward. So we are now working on preparing this Regional Ecological Summit, and hopefully by 2026, by the summit itself, we'll be able to deliver very concrete actions and concrete vision of joint actions going forward as a region. And one more thing that I want to say, why I emphasize on mitigation specifically and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, because if we fail to mitigate, then we will need to be allocating more money into adaptation and into dealing with the losses and damages. Last year, unfortunately, we were not spared from devastating floods, which became a real burden to, first of all, to people. Many people lost their houses, their belongings. It also became a huge burden on businesses, on budget. But the thing is that is the problem with climate, because it is going to create more of such challenges going ahead, and our job is to make sure that first of all we create the right instruments and mechanisms, adaptive coping mechanisms that can help us to minimize this kind of economic losses in the future, that we make sure that we are reducing our own carbon footprint so that to reduce the frequency or the intensity of such events in the future, but also making sure that we have very concrete understanding how we are going to address the losses and damages, especially of the people and of the communities. So Kazakhstan is very aware of the importance of just transition, and we are working on that very profoundly. Our policy, there is actually a very fundamental question, how fast we can go forward with climate policy. We can go very fast, but then we can be leaving people behind. But if you want to make sure that your climate policy is also well accepted by the population, that the people are reflecting on what you're doing, supporting it, and you're doing your climate transition more efficiently, then you really have to integrate the population, their interests. You have to reflect on their needs in terms of creation of new jobs and opportunities, and that will take a longer time. That will not be very fast. That will take time, but this is very important and this is very fundamental. And for Kazakhstan especially, this would be this is the important North Star that we are looking for in our policies.
And I'm assuming this, the reduction of carbon footprint and overall the effort on climate change isn't just a government side or a business side. It also depends on each one of us and our own efforts to contribute to contribute to tackling.
Yes, well, definitely. It is always about the choices that people make, and therefore changing our habits would be absolutely critical in dealing with different aspects, because it just happens that carbon footprint is not only about some very isolated issues. It is very it's very cross-cutting and cross-sectoral. To give you an example, about, if I'm not mistaken, about 9% of carbon emissions come from processing, basically from producing polymers and plastic. I mean, the more we consume, the more we, first of all, the more garbage we create.
Right.
Which is another environmental problem. But at the same time, the more we are the more our choices are resulting into our carbon footprint. So there are many different choices that you can make to really minimize your own carbon footprint. Another example would be, I'm not really necessarily advocating for that, but really reducing the meat consumption, especially of livestock. I myself, I have recently celebrated 11 years without meat, being vegetarian. So these also really help to reduce, let's say, the pressure on the planet. So I think at the end of the day, we are the masters of our fate, and it is important to make the right choices every day.
I want to keep the conversation going about the multilateral cooperation, and we're already talking about climate change, and I want to focus more on COP29, which was held in Baku, Azerbaijan in November last year. You were there representing Kazakhstan with a delegation. I was there personally covering the event on the ground. And what was it like for you to be in that room with negotiators across the world? What kind of pressure did you feel, if I may ask you on a personal level? Because being there, it seemed like some very important decisions were being made, but being in that room specifically on the table, what was it like for you?
Well, first of all, I think it is a big group of, it's a community. We might have representing different countries, of course, we might have very different ideas and different visions of certain things, but at the end of the day, I think the biggest, if I may say, vibe that you get is that everyone is understanding that we have no time, that acceleration of climate action is extremely important, and that we need to really find the ways how to make that happen. Last year's discussions there were a number of negotiating tracks, but one of the important decisions was made on new collective quantified goal on climate financing, and this has been discussed a lot. Of course, many negotiations are in general, the COP negotiations are never easy. They stretch, you have to throw all-nighters, they stretch across the weeks. I don't remember when was the last time when COP ended on time.
Right.
So, I mean, I've been in last two COPs being the head of the delegation, and both in Dubai and in Baku, we basically overstretched the time. So we finished much later, and the Baku, the decisions were made, I think the COP29 completed at around 5 a.m. on I think it was going into Sunday, from Saturday to Sunday. So we're sitting entire night, and there were discussions going on until the very last minute. What was the decision? The decision was that the developed countries will provide about $300 billion annually, and will mobilize and about $1.3 trillion annually will be mobilized in climate financing from different sources by 2035. So this is very important, because until this moment, the goal was to have about $100 billion in climate financing, and basically we're talking about tripling of those resources. However, at the same time, I myself was supporting COP29 presidency as transparency high-level co-pair alongside with Italy, and we were discussing a lot the issues of transparency. We were working with the member states on encouraging them to submit their biannual transparency report. The biannual transparency reports, or BTRs, how we call them, might be not very familiar for people who are outside of this climate agenda, to journalists or to the general public. However, why these transparency reports are important is that It is to transparency reports that we can understand where we are standing, who is doing what, and how we need to proceed in the future, whether our actions are sufficient, whether the resources that we are allocating are sufficient to really achieve the goal of really reducing our carbon emissions and making sure that we stay within the limit of 2 degrees by 2050, and increasingly I don't want to say unlikely, but and hopefully within 1.5 degrees by 2050, which is becoming, unfortunately, increasingly unlikely, according to the scientists, because the pace of the temperature rise is so fast that it is very likely that we will surpass that 1.5 degrees. So these were some of the things that we have been doing, but of course, the most important thing at COPs is to really find the common ground. In general, we all are united by the common goal. Divisions in terms of the implementation might be a little bit different, but that is the reason why we go to this forums. And I really hope that going forward, all this decision, Baku to Bilem roadmap on mobilizing climate finance, including that these goals are well operationalized and implemented, because this is very critical and very important.
And I'm assuming the work for the COP30 in Benin are all underway, right?
We are, yes, absolutely. We are working. Just, I think, a couple of days from now, we start our the discussions, the Bonn discussions, Bonn climate conference. Our delegation also will be is preparing. So I think after Bonn there will be much more clarity on some of the technicalities, some technical aspects, moving towards COP30. But of course this year is very special because we're celebrating the 30th Conference of the Parties of UNFCCC. It is also the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. There are many different discussions going on. The world is in general increasingly uncertain, but I think there are always things which are, should we say, trendy, which come and go, but there are things which are fundamental, and really protecting the health of the environment is something which is very fundamental.
Apart from COP29 in Baku, Kazakhstan co-hosted the One Water Summit in Riyadh, and Kazakhstan is also preparing to host back here at home the Regional Climate Summit, as you mentioned just earlier. How do you think, what is the real impact of these initiatives? We speak multilaterally. I know that the impact might not be very fast and quick. It's long term, maybe delayed, but what do you see is the ultimate goal of these initiatives?
Speaking of One Water Summit, it was not only co-hosted by Kazakhstan, it was basically a joint initiative of our president, Kassym-Jomart and President of French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, which was also organized in partnership with the World Bank and was supported by Saudi Arabia. The idea of the One Water Summit was the following. We speak a lot about the importance of water agenda, about the importance of water issues, about the importance of water challenges. Unfortunately, unlike the climate agenda, the water agenda did not really gain as much political momentum as climate issues. For example, back in 2023, we had the UN Water Conference, first in almost 5 decades. I was leading the delegation of the Republic of Kazakhstan in the capacity of Minister of Ecology at that time. And it was very clear that first, that conference was very important in terms of the timeliness, because the water challenges became so profound that we really needed a separate fora to have these discussions. But at the same time, it was very clear that there needs to be more political momentum around this issue. And the two presidents, our president and president of France, they decided that the water issues, they do deserve to be really kind of raised in terms of their profound globally. I think we managed to achieve this goal in terms of having the water discussions be held at a higher level. We engaged a number of presidents of different countries and different regions. We had many ministers and other high-level political representatives, and there were many issues that were tackled. To give you an example, when we were preparing for the One Water Summit, we had a number of steering committee discussions. And one thing that was raised by a number of organizations is that despite we say that the water challenges are increasingly important, unfortunately public financing in the last few years have been decreasing. That was a surprise to us. So what happened at One Water Summit is that 9 international development banks, they issued a joint statement where they said that they will be reprioritizing the water-related issues and investing and financing water infrastructure and water-related projects, which I think is very important. That really reflects the vision and the readiness of many international institutions to work more profoundly on these specific issues. In Kazakhstan, of course, we also made sure that we are doing our fair share. For example, our president has announced that Kazakhstan will be joining the Freshwater Challenge. The Freshwater Challenge is about preservation of the wetlands. Some people may think, wetlands, yes, it is a water object, but what does it have to do with the water availability? It just happens that wetlands are a very important nature-based solution for flood management, for water management, and in general, really keeping the moisture and really having this the healthy water cycle. So there was a number of initiatives that we and commitments that we as Kazakhstan have announced, and we are working on them very actively. We specifically on Freshwater Challenge. We also mentioned that we will be working on the Balkhash Lake preservation, which basically this initiative was also championed by our private sector representatives and for example, the Kazakhmys, one of the leading private entity, they just recently established a fund on the foundation that will be funding the projects that are aimed at preservation of the Balkhash Lake ecosystem. So these are some of the issues that have been tackled at the One Water Summit, and we hope that the outcomes and the discussions of the One Water Summit will be a very strong contribution to the upcoming UN Water Conference that will take place in 2026. The Regional Ecological Summit that I mentioned, indeed, this is a little bit more, the idea of the Regional Ecological Summit is a little bit more concrete in terms of, it was really coming from thinking of what should be our next steps and joint action? What concrete can we do so that to really change the situation? If we, for example, if we're discussing with potential investors the climate financing and investment issues, where, when, and how much do we need? Really identifying very concrete aspects that can really accelerate the climate action by 2030 and by 2035. So the idea is very practical to really make sure that we can implement or mainstream certain solutions to tackle the triple planetary crisis. And there is also some experience that Kazakhstan could share with other countries in the region in that respect. And we hope that the upcoming summit will be let's say, will really be a milestone in regional climate action.
I'm very much looking forward to the summit to be hosted by Kazakhstan, and I'm really glad to see that voices of countries like Kazakhstan are amplified on the global stage. So we have the diversity and inclusion of voices here. I want to jump back to the point that you mentioned earlier, that you are in close contact not only with international partners, but you also quite frequently in touch with the grassroots movement. What is your take on the civic engagement on environmental issues overall in Kazakhstan?
I will tell you one thing. Tomorrow is going to be the World Environment Day, so it's going to be a professional holiday for those people who are working on environment. It is always really interesting to learn from other people and from those who are really working let's say, on the ground. It's not only the civil society, but also research institutions and so on. You mentioned about Asil Baymukanova, who works on the Caspian seals. Basically, I joined their expedition. I was part of their expedition on the Caspian seals. And this is very important for several reasons. One is these issues are very critical. I mean, not critical, but well, critical, yes, but at the same time, these are some of the issues which are in a constant, in a permanent focus of our president, especially the issues of the biodiversity conservation, right. And this interest of the president and his attention to these issues basically resulted in his new initiative on establishing the International Fund on Biodiversity Conservation, and which he is going to lead himself. This is what he said. And of course, really connecting with those people who are indeed working on the ground on preserving, for example, turtles or the Caspian seals or something else, is very eye-opening and really helps us to better reflect first what we are doing and what we're doing right. Second, what still needs to be done. And third, of course, where we could focus our attention better to get better results or bigger results. So there are some good results, for example, in conservation of the Saiga antelope, right. which I think this good experience needs to be scaled up to other species like Caspian seals and so on, to the snow leopards. So there is still so many things that needs to be done, and you can only learn by talking with people. This is about animals, but for example, we also have the botanic gardens, right. And not many people know, but for example, in Aktau, which is very arid region in the city, we have the only in the western part of Kazakhstan, in the western region, in the western part of Kazakhstan, we have the only botanic garden in the city of Aktau, which was established in 1972, and they have one of the biggest collection of roses. They have about 146 types of roses. I mean, it's tremendous work and labor to really have. I mean, if you've been to Aktau, you will see that there is. It's a desert. It's a very deserted, arid area with no water, not much greens, and then suddenly you have this absolutely beautiful botanic garden right in the middle of the city. Not many people know, but it's really amazing how much work they have been doing, how much effort they have been putting into really preserving and expanding, and I think really learning from them and really connecting the high-level president's vision with what is happening and what needs to be happen is very important. And I think really having this exchange is also critical. But at the same time, it also really shows the readiness of the government to listen, to hear, and to know what is happening. This is another visionary principle that President has voiced, which is hearing Kazakhstan, hearing state. We have to be hearing what is happening. But without without really going out of our offices, you can't really hear what is happening there.
Exactly.
So this is basic. These are some of the ideas, but it's really exciting. We have amazing people, and for example, I learned that we have a lady who discovered a new type of butterfly, a beautiful butterfly, and was named after her. It's called Turanana Louisa. That's the name of the butterfly. I never knew, for example, before, I never knew that we have such amazing scientists, and including women scientists,
of course,
who do this kind of tremendous work and really contributing to the to science. So I mean, really discovering them, really exploring, learning from them, and really translating that into policy actions. I think this is really important, and President thinks that this is very important, and I'm very and I feel very honored to be able to be this. Perhaps messenger and the person who also helps to translate the big vision into great actions, hopefully.
I had my last question to wrap up the conversation, and I wanted to ask you what keeps you motivated to do the work. But while you were telling all of these stories, I can already see the motivation in your eyes. So I can see how passionate and motivated you are about your job. And I want to thank you, Zulfiya, for coming to the studio tonight and sharing all your expertise and insights that you are doing and the government and the country is doing on environmental issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.